I'm finally finishing puberty, so I hope that you will forbear with me. My kids, they caught a cold last week, and we've always taught them that sharing is caring. And so they took that to heart in that one area. Tonight we're talking about dinosaurs, and hopefully frog in my throat won't be too distracting to you. If it is, I can't do anything about it. If I could, I would, I promise you. But we are talking about dinosaurs, and you probably are pretty excited about dinosaurs. Dinosaurs are an exciting discussion. They're an exciting topic. And we probably rarely talk about dinosaurs from the pulpit. And so this is an opportunity, a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity probably for many of us, to talk about dinosaurs, unless Chris returns to dinosaurs at some point, and maybe he will. They are fascinating, aren't they? After all, billions of dollars are made from movies about dinosaurs, especially when you get somebody like Chris Pratt in your movie. Right. You are bound to make millions and billions of dollars just off of that mug. My kids have dinosaurs at home. We talk about dinosaurs all the time. I think sometimes as Christians we think that's an area off limits, like we're not supposed to talk about dinosaurs because dinosaurs don't really fit into the Bible. The Bible doesn't talk a lot about dinosaurs. I hope that I can change that for you tonight. I hope that I can maybe cause you to think about some passages in a little bit of a different way than you are used to. If you were not here last night, we laid the groundwork for tonight, so you should have been here last night because you're going to miss out on some things that we talked about. But I'll give you just a quick synopsis. Last night we said that science can very much agree with the Bible as far as the timeline that the Bible gives. The Bible does give a timeline. That's why we can't be indifferent about that. The Bible does, in the form of genealogies, provide a backbone of dating for the world. And so we can't be indifferent about that. In fact, the way that we are introduced to Jesus in the New Testament is by means of a genealogy. It may not be our favorite thing to study, but it is important. And so when you look at the genealogies of Genesis 4 and 5 with Cain and Seth, and you look at the Genesis 10 and 11 genealogies where you have the Table of Nations bridging us all the way to the time of the patriarchs, then you have the genealogies in 1 Chronicles 1 through 8. Remember last night I said, if you're ever struggling to fall asleep, 1 Chronicles 1 through 8 will do it for you. That's a little bit of a joke and a little bit serious at the same time, even for a preacher like myself. And then you have, of course, the genealogies of Jesus in Matthew 1 and in Luke chapter 3, which bridge us all the way across the Old and New Testament eras. And so we do have a timeline that we function with in regards to the Bible. That is very different from what we talked about last night. Last night, the macroevolutionary or the naturalistic timeline, very different. In fact, rather than having the co-occurrence of dinosaurs and people, you don't even come close to having them existing at the same time. You have at least scientists, the science being settled and how it is. Scientists disagree a lot on that. But it's about 63 to 65 million years between the time of people and dinosaurs. So does that match up with the Bible? No, it does not. Right. And so that should not cause you to become unsettled in your faith. That just means that we have to roll up our sleeves and we have to do a little bit more research. And we have to think a little bit differently than maybe we are used to. And as we talked about last night, you don't have to be a biochemist, you don't have to be a paleontologist to understand these things, but it will be pushed down your throats, and it will be pushed down your children's throats, and it will be pushed down your grandchildren's throats day in and day out. Doesn't matter if you are at the Museum of Natural History, doesn't matter if you were at the Grand Canyon, doesn't matter if you're on vacation with your family, or they're looking at their textbook in school, they will be having this shoved in their face and down their throat. And so we need to equip ourselves to actually face this head on. This is not the timeline that the Bible gives. We will talk a little bit about what the timeline of the Bible gives, but all in all, we're going to focus on basically two things tonight. dinosaurs, and if my voice holds out, we will go through some fossils as well. But you'll see this everywhere. National Geographic magazine, you ever heard of that? 1993. If you haven't heard of that, you're lying, because I know you've heard of it. No human being has ever seen a live dinosaur. That's why Jurassic Park and Jurassic World sell a lot of their movies, right? Because it's fascinating to think about dinosaurs and people at the same time. But National Geographic says no. It didn't exist at the same time. Very different from Genesis chapter 1. Now, our taxpayer dollars don't always go to things that we like, right?
Right.
The U.S. Geological Survey, they do a lot of good work, but one of the things that they have on pretty much the front page of their website is this question: did people and dinosaurs live at the same time? No, their website says. Our tax dollars. Right. After the dinosaurs died out, nearly 65 million years passed before people appeared on Earth. So stop paying your tax. No, I'm just kidding. But it just goes to show it's everywhere. It doesn't matter where you go, what you look at, it's in your face. So you can't be indifferent about it. As a believer, we should not be indifferent about such things. The Bible does give us a timeline. The Bible does talk about God creating all living things, which would include dinosaurs at some point, right? At some point, and people as well. Now, this is such a prominent point that is made with such passion and ardor that it makes it all the easier to disprove. Because when somebody comes at something very passionately, if you can just demonstrate one example that's an exception, it rocks their world, or it should rock their world, right? It should rock their world. And so what we're thinking about tonight is basically this. In Genesis 1, when God creates all things, accepting himself, right? When he creates all things, dinosaurs and people are made at the same time or around the same time. So if we can show this, if we can show that dinosaurs and people existed at the same time, that would rock that evolutionary timeline, wouldn't it?
Right.
That would validate the biblical timeline. If coexistence could be shown, this one quote, this is Louis Jacobs of the Southern Methodist University, he's a professor there. He was the former president of the Society of Vertebrate Paleontology, person of great influence. He actually did not have a very high view of the Bible, as you can tell from his quote, but he said, such an association, the co-occurrence of men and dinosaurs, would dispel on Earth with vast antiquity the entire history of creation, including the day of rest. Glad he pointed that out, right? Could be accommodated in the 7 biblical days of the Genesis myth. Evolution would be vanquished. And he calls Genesis and the creation a myth, so that tells you a little bit about his perspective on what Genesis is. Genesis, the creation, is not a myth. Adam and Eve are not a myth. The flood of Noah is not a myth. In fact, I'm not trying to sell anything, but in the 3rd book that I'm intending to publish, I will talk a little bit about that. And you don't have to buy a book, I'll tell you. If you call me, if you ever want to call me or text me, let Chris know. We'll talk about that. Genesis ain't no myth, okay? It ain't no book of myths.
Myth.
A little bit more as far as quotations here. Ernst Mayr, he's passed away since now, but Ernst Mayr was from Harvard University. You ever heard of it? Harvard University. Creationists, that's us, have stated that humans and dinosaurs were contemporaries in time. Were this momentous statement true, the names of its discoverers would thunder down the corridors of time as individuals who made one of the most outstanding discoveries of the 20th century. He said that like in the 90s, so they were at the end of the 20th century at that point. And then Nova. You ever watch PBS? Finding dinosaur footprints is what they're talking about, side by side with humans, would counter evidence that humans evolved long after the dinosaurs became extinct and back up the claim that all species, including man, were created at one time. That's a reference to Genesis 1, a very not so subtle reference to Genesis chapter 1. So, let's explore a little bit about what evidence we have available to us, because this weekend's all kind of about science, and that's what we're thinking about. But all this is going to be traced back to Genesis 1. So I'm going to count on you being a little bit familiar with Genesis 1. I'm not going to read through all of Genesis 1. I would love to. I'm not going to. But I'm going to count on you having that knowledge. And I want you to think about, again, the shift of paradigm that is required. Because we've heard this since we were in school, right? That dinosaurs were 65 million years before people, at least a lot of the big ones that we think about. Marco Polo. So outside of the swimming pool, you probably know a little bit about Marco Polo, right? Marco Polo. Marco Polo was an explorer, of course. He was an explorer who went all over the place. He went on various different quests to find different things. And on one trip to China, the travels of Marco Polo the Venetian. You can Google this if you want to. I encourage you to. But he wrote this. He said, leaving the city of Yako and traveling 10 days in a westerly direction, you reach the province of Karazhan, which is also the name of its chief city. Here are seen huge serpents, 10 paces in length, and 10 spans in the girth of its body. At the forepart, near the head, they have 2 short legs, having 3 claws like those of a tiger, with eyes larger than a 4-penny loaf, and very glaring. The jaws are wide enough to swallow a man. The teeth are sharp and large, and their whole appearance is so formidable that neither man nor any kind of animal can approach them without terror. By their motion in this way along the shore and their vast weight, they make a deep depression, as if a heavy beam had been drawn along the sands. Those whose employment it is to hunt them, imagine having that job, right? Observe the track by which they are most frequently accustomed to go, and fix into the ground several pieces of wood armed with sharp iron spikes, which they cover with the sand in such a manner as not to be perceptible. When therefore the animals make their way towards the places they usually haunt, they are wounded by these instruments and speedily killed. Now, keep in mind that this predates the Renaissance. They don't even have the term dinosaur in their vernacular, in their vocabulary. The term dinosaur didn't come into modern usage until the late 1800s. So how would you describe a dinosaur? You'd call it a big serpent, right? A big serpent. Now, I want you to think about this too. What's he describing here? You don't have to be a paleontologist to get this. Short front legs, 3 claws, big eyes, huge. A T-Rex, right? He's describing a T-Rex. Again, you don't have to be a paleontologist to get that. This is Marco Polo writing about this. He's not going to the Museum of Natural History to go research his dinosaurs. He's talking about something real. If he was talking about a Komodo dragon, he would not have described it in this way. Komodo dragons are not big enough to swallow a man whole. Now, they could kill somebody, for sure. Go to Louisville Zoo, you can see one of the Komodo dragons there. This is clearly a T-Rex that he's describing hundreds of years ago, in existence, with people. Well after Adam and Eve, well after even Jesus was here on the earth, he describes dinosaurs. Now, he's not the only one. As far as written history, we have people like Pliny the Elder. Pliny the Elder was a naturalist as far as his first occupation. And in his Natural History, Book 8, he talks about serpentine creatures that can eat elephants. Now, you may have watched Anaconda back in the 90s and got kind of this weird understanding of snakes kind of devouring people, but an elephant? That sounds like a T-Rex or something like that, an iguanodon, something huge. He actually describes this. And actually, in his natural histories, in Book 8, he distinguishes between what he's describing there and snakes and alligators and crocodiles. He actually makes a separate section for these animals. Now, Pliny the Elder, he's around kind of the first couple centuries AD. So this is, again, about 2,000 years ago. but well within the time of people. Around the time of Jesus walking on the earth, he's describing dinosaurs, categorizing them in his history. Now, Herodotus also talks about this. Herodotus is a Greek historian. He wrote in particular about the Persians, and the Persians fall to the Greeks. Josephus, the Jewish historian, writes about pterodactyls and pteranodons. He actually comments on Numbers 21. You remember the fiery serpents that God sent among his people? He comments on that. He talks about that. So think about that as we're going through this. We're going to go through some artwork now. In the top left, can anybody tell me what kind of dinosaur that is? Chris, can you tell me what kind of dinosaur that is?
Stegosaurus.
You remember? That's a Stegosaurus, right? Now that he said it, you're like, oh, yeah. I remember Chris Pratt. Yeah, right? And then on the top right, that's Top Rome, by the way. It's by Angkor Wat in Cambodia. That's from the 12th century, but over 600 years before they even came up with the term dinosaur. Top right, that's the Sumatran crested dinosaur, Sumatra. Bottom left is the Hongshan jade Protoceratops. It's a Protoceratops. Wouldn't expect you necessarily to remember that one, but a Stegosaurus, y'all should have had that one. Bottom middle. This is from Mesopotamia. So Tigris, Euphrates, Babylon, Assyria, these kingdoms. This seal is from Uruk, which is in that area. And what do you see there? Well, if you remember Land Before Time, that's Littlefoot, right? That's Littlefoot. Well, it's maybe his parents. But you see them intersecting their necks, and they're huge. And if you want to see these pictures afterwards, if they're not big enough for you, I'd be happy to show you bigger pictures. Bottom right, this is from the 15th century, so kind of the heyday of the Renaissance, the Italian Renaissance. This is from the tomb of a man named Richard Bell. Now these Littlefoots are called actually sauropods. It's a huge class of dinosaurs. They have long necks, long tails, big hulking bodies. They could pretty much walk over your house and destroy it, which would incentivize you to probably get rid of something like that, right? So these are sauropods that we see here. Now, keep in mind, we've got some from Asia, we've got some from Europe here. We're going to show you some from Africa now, and also Italy, kind of around the Mediterranean basin. So the top left, anybody here know a little bit of Greek? Chris? Oh, we're going to fix that. Crocodilo peridotus.
Yeah, exactly.
Crocodilo peridotus. That's that inscription right there. Ain't working. That's Crocodilo peridotus. You know what a crocodilo is? Crocodile. You got it. Okay, you know Greek, right? Okay, so peridotus, a little bit harder. What's a peridotus? A leopard. Now imagine trying to describe a dinosaur. A crocodile leopard. That's pretty good. Leopards are known as being fast. Crocodiles, armored, kind of scaly, right? Big, nasty teeth. Crocodilo peridotus. And they're hunting him, just like Marco Polo said, right? Work smarter. Top left, we have from the region of Pompeii. By the way, that left one's from Palestrina, Italy. The one on the top right is from Pompeii. It was actually buried in ash in that city and preserved for us. So that predates 79 AD, because that's when you have the eruption of Mount Vesuvius. And in there, you can actually see, if you get really close, on the bottom right, there's a guy riding on the back of a dinosaur. Imagine that, right? People ride on the back of horses. People ride on the back of cows. Crazy people. People ride on the back of all sorts of different things. This guy's riding on the back of a dinosaur. Pretty neat to think about that. So pre-79 AD. Again, they're not going to the Natural History Museum, right, to get this. They're not watching the Chris Pratt movies, although I'm sure they would have loved to partake in those movies. Bottom left, this is called the Girafalco pottery, and I'll ask you again, what kind of dinosaur is that? Stegosaurus, bottom left. Obviously, a person made that, right? You could claim that it's water erosion if you want, but let's be honest, somebody made that. Bottom right, from Mali, which is a West African nation, this is a Griposaurus, is what this is referred to as. And what's on the back of that Griposaurus? Somebody's riding it. People are timeless, aren't they? Riding whatever they can ride. That's a bronze Griposaurus. Now moving on a little bit here, petroglyphs. If you ever go out to the west, Mark McCrary was here last night. He was out in Moab, Utah, so he would see some of this kind of stuff out there. Top left, again, if you want to see this afterwards, I will gladly show this to you. Somebody has drawn a sauropod with paint, a Native American in particular, has drawn this onto the rock there in Utah. This is before the 1200s, where you have the Anasazi Indians who are in that area. Next to it, on the right, we have a hadrosaur. That's a hadrosaur. And this is a hadrosaur petroglyph from Arizona and Havasupai Canyon down there. And on the bottom, we have an ankylosaurus that was found in Ontario. So we have, even in North America, examples of dinosaurs during the time of people. So we've seen Europe, we've seen Asia, we've seen Africa, we've seen North America, and we'll move on here. Something that you may have come across in your studies of dinosaurs. There have been several examples of these. I believe, if I recall correctly, that this one is from China. They found one in Russia, and they have found one in Texas, actually, where you have a dinosaur footprint over a human footprint. And they can date this and show that this was not something that was just made. You know, a long time ago, several decades ago, there was a man who put on dinosaur feet, fake dinosaur feet down in Florida, and he walked all on the beaches, and everybody was like, "What's going on? There's dinosaurs," right? He was messing with people, but he was found out, right? Eventually he was found out. These things can be tested, and they are tested, because people of an evolutionary persuasion don't want to see something like this. Now, we've hit a lot of different areas. One area that we've not talked about yet is Central and South America. Central and South America, but as a bridge. The top left is the Granby Idol that was found in Colorado. It has ancient Chinese dialect on it, and it has a variety of different actual dinosaurs on it. They got as much as they could on there. That dates to probably the 1800s at least. It's hard to date that one because it's like a solid piece of granite. Not a whole lot of dating that you can do on something like that. On the right, top middle, what do you see? Somebody riding a dinosaur. All over, every continent, somebody wants to ride their dinosaur. So that's Triceratops here. That's Sarah from The Land Before Time, if you ever watched those. That's Sarah. That one and the collection next to it are called the Acambaro figurines. Those are from Mexico. The Acambaro figurines. And they have been found with human skulls in that same area. So people and dinosaurs, same time. And then on the bottom, across the bottom, we have the Ica burial stones from Peru. Not Inca, Ica, I-C-A. These are the Ica burial stones from Peru. And again, you have all sorts of etchings in there of different dinosaurs. You have T-Rexes, and you have Triceratops, and you've got Pteranodons, and you've got Pterodactyls, and you've got all sorts of different things on these stones. So are you inspired yet? That's what Genesis 1 talks about, right? I mean, on the sixth day, God creates the land animals, and he creates people. Land animals would include dinosaurs. Dinosaurs. Let's actually take a look there. Genesis chapter 1. I'm going to be reading from the 1995 New American Standard. But if you have the New King James, or if you have whatever edition, you'll see something that's comparable to this. Genesis chapter 1, starting verse 20. And what we're doing now is we're thinking about what the Bible says about dinosaurs. Then God said, "Let the waters abound with an abundance of living creatures, and let the birds fly above the earth across the face of the firmament of the heavens." So God created sea creatures, or sea monsters, some translations say, and every living thing that moves, with which the waters abounded according to their kind, and every winged bird according to its kind. And God saw that it was good. And God blessed them, saying, "Be fruitful and multiply, and fill the waters and the seas, and let birds multiply on the earth." So the evening and the morning were the fifth day. Then God said, "Let the earth bring forth a living creature according to its kind, cattle and creeping thing and beast of the earth, each according to its kind." And it was so. And God made the beast of the earth according to its kind, cattle to its kind, and everything that creeps on the earth according to its kind. And God saw that it was good. So put yourself into this new paradigm of people and dinosaurs existing. And when you see a list like this, and it says every living creature, that would include dinosaurs. That would include Stegosauruses, and Ankylosauruses, and Pteranodons, and Pterodactyls, and T-Rexes, and Iguanodons, and all these other different dinosaurs that there are, all at the same time. Turn with me to the book of Job as we dig in a little bit more. Job 40 and 41. Does anybody remember what God does when he comes onto the scene in Job 38? He tells Job, "Gird up your loins." He probably said a little deeper than that, but gird up your loins. There we go. He said, "Gird up your loins like a man, and you give me an answer." In Job chapter 40, he talks about a creature that he deems behemoth. I'm going to say behemoth. If if you know your Hebrew and you want to correct me, feel free. But I'm going to say behemoth. In Job 41, he talks about Leviathan. Now, behemoth seems more like a land creature. Leviathan seems more like a sea creature that can also fly. We'll read Job 40, verses 15 through 24. "Behold now behemoth, which I made, as well as you." So let me ask you a question. Is this a myth? No. God specifically says, "I made behemoth." He eats grass like an ox. So he's an herbivore, right? "Behold now, his strength is in his loins, and his power in the muscles of his belly. He bends his tail like a cedar. The sinews of his thighs are knit together. His bones are tubes of bronze. His limbs are like bars of iron. He is the first of the ways of God. Let his maker bring near his sword. Surely the mountains bring him food, and all the beasts of the field play there. Under the lotus plants he lies down. In the covert of the reeds and the marsh, the lotus plants cover him with shade. The willows of the brook surround him. If a river rages, he is not alarmed. He is confident, though the Jordan rushes to his mouth. Can anyone capture him when he is on watch? With barbs, can anyone pierce his nose? So remember what God's whole rhetoric is here. Job, you have no idea what you're talking about. I know what you're going through. It has not escaped my notice. But you have no idea what you're talking about. You say you want to go to a courtroom and charge me. All right, let's go to the courtroom. And Job can't even say anything, right? Until Job 42, and he's like, whoa, whoa, whoa. I get it. I get it. Behemoth here, made by God, not mythic. An herbivore, massive, incredibly strong, tail like a cedar tree. Okay, this is where it gets really interesting. Do you have footnotes in your Bible? If you do, I want you to look at the footnote for verse 15. The New American Standard says a hippopotamus. Now, you may not have seen a lot of hippopotamuses in your life. Hippopotami. I'm not sure. But you probably know this. Does a hippopotamus have a huge tail? No. It has a tail about that size right there. And you know what that tail is used for? Spreading dung as a scent marker. Now God is trying to describe his power, right? And he tells Job, just like the tail of a hippopotamus, that's my power. Now, right? Footnotes can be helpful. They can also be trash. This one is trash. If you got a Sharpie with you, block it out. It's clearly not a hippopotamus. Tail like a cedar tree. Let me ask you a question. What does have a huge tail that's 30 or 40 feet long and is like a cedar tree? A dinosaur. In particular, a sauropod, right? Littlefoot's parents. Or his grandparents. Anyways. He is preeminent. He is the first of the ways of God. Verse 19 says, he spends a lot of time in the shade. If you're massive, right, you don't want to be baking in the sun all day. Remember what elephants do? Elephants put mud on their back to try and cool off because they live on the savannah. But if you don't live on the savannah, you're going to hang out in the shade if you're that big. Not afraid of floods. Something big. Uncapturable. Something big, right? Now the next chapter, there's a creature called Leviathan that is described in Job 41. I'm not going to read through all of Job 41. I'll spare you that. But in verse 33, it tells us that he exists on earth, which makes him real. And nothing is made like him. So he's real. A lot of times people will try to call this a myth. They'll try to connect this to different mythologies in Mesopotamia. This is not a myth. Verse 33 points out that it's not a myth. He is described, or it is described as uncapturable, terrifying, armored and scaly, mightily strong, large with sharp teeth, breathing fire. It says there's light coming from his mouth and his nostrils. This is not just acid. Light. He spends a lot of time in the water. There's some disagreement about this, but he may be able to fly, and he is utterly unique among all creatures. Nothing on earth is like him. I would suggest to you that these are the closest we get to a visual depiction of dinosaurs in the text. And to me, it's inescapable that these two are references to dinosaurs. It may not be for you, but that's as specific as we get to two distinct types of dinosaurs in the Bible. And based on the coexistence of humanity and dinosaurs, I have no problem seeing them. Let's move through this next section a little quickly. You may have seen in the past few years, if you frequent the Institute for Creation Research website or their Facebook page, or Answers in Genesis, if you have studied any of their publications, you've seen that there's been an uptick in the past decade or so of soft tissue preservation. So things like blood cells and protein matrix. You see that there's a lot of this preserved in these very old, supposedly very old fossils. So let me give you a few examples. The first one here is Dakota. Dakota was found in 1999 in, guess where? The Dakotas. This was a mummified, nearly intact hadrosaur with excellent soft tissue preservation on here. The second one is Leonardo, ghastly, disgusting, but beautiful. In 2000, this is a duck-billed dinosaur, 90% of the skeleton's covered in soft tissue. That kind of stuff doesn't last 65 million years. I hate to tell you. Actually, I don't hate it at all. I love to tell you that. It doesn't last 65 million years. It's close to a miracle that it lasted as long as it did in the environment that they found it in. 2011, the four-legged tank. His face was actually preserved really incredibly, so this one's really cool. This is a nodosaur. This is possibly the best preserved fossil of all time. You can see it. You can Google it if you want. The four-legged tank. And then, appropriately named Yucca, this is a baby woolly mammoth that was found with blood and hair and protein matrix and skin. That does not last tens of thousands of years. It certainly does not last hundreds of thousands of years. A few more. This is a T-Rex femur bone. That's your leg bone, your thigh bone. This was found in 2000, and they actually broke this thigh bone so they could look at the inside of it. And they examined the inside of it, and they found blood vessels and cells and developmental protein matrix in this bone. You cannot find this stuff after millions of years. Rarely does it ever last 1,000 years, let alone 65 million years. Another one, this is actually a Triceratops horn. This was found, I believe, in Northridge, California, and in a desert place, actually, which would have destroyed, seemingly, this sort of soft tissue that we would normally find with something like this. And they found soft tissue inside of this Triceratops horn. Now, take a little bit of a different direction with you. Scientists have found that they can actually fossilize something pretty quickly. You may have seen the coal miner's boot in the coal. That was fossilized. This was a hammer that was found in a rock formation that was formerly referred to as 110 million years old. What kind of dinosaur was using hammers 110 million years ago? So, this all begs the question, where'd they go? Where'd they go? Well, you know, you've all seen it, the asteroid, right? Boom! Everything's dead. Except, here's the problem. We have frogs and butterflies. Why did this kill reptiles with scales, but not kill off butterflies? and frogs. Ice ages, maybe. Maybe, but not on the timeline of the macroevolutionists. It's not unthinkable to think that there was some cooling after Noah's flood. We do have dinosaurs and woolly mammoths frozen in blocks of ice, and so we do have to explain that. So ice ages, maybe. Evolution. Did dinosaurs just find out one day, hey, we got to turn into birds, or we're not going to stick around? And then the birds figured out, hey, it'd probably be better if we didn't have wings, and we'll just get rid of those and just hang out on the ground. All of my life, I have dreamed as a kid of what it would be like to fly. Not on Southwest Airlines or UPS, but to fly. Seems like a backward step to me. What about extinction? Just kind of mass extinction or common extinction? Every year, on average, since we've been measuring for the past couple hundred years, 200 different species of plants and animals go extinct every single year. So you add that up, 10 years, 2,000 species gone. 100 years, 20,000 species gone. You go back 6,000 or 7,000 years, that's a lot of plants and animals that have gone out of existence. So that's not that hard to think about. And then I'll throw a fifth example in here for you. Again, as we talked about earlier, would you want a sauropod marching through your village? Would you want raptors marching into your tent and carrying your kids away? Probably not. And so you would kill them off. When we study dinosaurs and fossils, it should lead to a belief in God. Chance and design are antithetical concepts, and a decline in religious belief can probably be attributed more to the propagation and advocacy by the intellectual and scientific community of the Darwinian version of evolution than to any other single factor. It's biochemist Michael Denton saying that. This is in kids' textbooks. It's in Magic Schoolhouse books. It's in, as I talked about last night, Arthur the Aardvark. It's in all these books. It's everywhere. And it's challenging us, and it is reshaping people's worldview and driving them away from the Bible. Don't be dismissive. Don't say it doesn't matter. Don't say, I'll never get that. You can, and you will, if you apply yourself. So I'm going to give you an option, Chris. I'm going to put you on the spot. Do we want to cover fossils tonight or no?
Whatever you want to do.
All right. 2/3 vote, we'll go with fossils, and we'll keep going. If we get anything less than 2/3, that's fine. Who wants to talk about fossils?
Just go ahead, Eric. Just go ahead.
Go ahead. All right. If you need to leave, you can leave. That's fine. We'll keep going. All right. Proverbs 18, verse 17. Proverbs 18:17. The first to plead his case seems right until another comes and examines him. When you look at fossils, it actually does not support in any way, shape, or form the evolutionary timeline or evolutionary expectation. There's a lot of really big leaps that are taken. There is a lot of extrapolating. Just because two things look similar doesn't mean that they came from the same place as far as evolution. They may have came out of the same factory, God's factory, but they did not come from the same place as far as evolution. There are a lot of leaps from a lot of really small data. We'll talk about an example of that later on. And from the perspective of fossils, 95% of the fossils that we have are from the ocean, and they are invertebrates. Vertebrates make up a small portion of 1% of the total fossils that we have. Primates make up a tiny fraction of that tiny fraction of 1%. And yet, everybody can visualize the chimpanzee to person transition, right? Such little data. So let's talk about some of these transitional forms. One of the big ones for macroevolution is to go from reptile to bird. Scales turn into feathers, if given enough time. We got several examples here. Archaeopteryx, Sinosauropteryx, Archaeoraptor, and Sinornithomimus. No, that's a different one. Sinornithosaurus. There we go. Sinornithosaurus. All right, so these names, they're funny because the first one, Archaea, just means old. Sino means China. Saur means dinosaur. And so, if you want to sound important, like we talked about last night, use Latin. So let's briefly talk about this. Bird to reptile. Storrs Olson was the director, the curator of the Smithsonian Institution for a long time. In 1999, he said this: "The idea of feathered dinosaurs and the theropod origin of birds, so from lizards or small reptiles, is being actively promoted by a cadre of zealous scientists acting in concert with certain editors at Nature and National Geographic, who themselves have become outspoken and highly biased proselytizers of the faith. Truth and careful scientific weighing of evidence have been among the first casualties in their program, which is now fast becoming one of the grander scientific hoaxes of the age. There is not one undisputed example of a dinosaur with feathers. None. The public deserves to know this." Probably one that means a little bit more to us. Aped man, right? Aped man. What is man that you are mindful of him? What is the Son of Man that you give heed or attention to him? You have made us a little lower than the angels, and you have crowned us with glory. The evolutionist says we come from apes. We don't. We don't. Now, apes are amazing. They're amazing. They're incredible. And they have some similarities to us. But we're not apes. The second one here is Neanderthal. Neanderthal man. They found this grouping of bones, this skeleton, and they said, lo and behold, we have a whole progression of humanity from times and ancient past. This is Neanderthal. So, Geico commercials, remember those? Neanderthal. They did research on this guy's hands and his feet and his head, and they realized this. He had arthritis. That accounts for all the differences between a modern person and Neanderthal. Arthritis. Anybody here struggle with arthritis? You're a Neanderthal. Third one, Cro-Magnon. Cro-Magnon. Two found next to each other. Similar idea. They find a skull. They find actually two skeletons in this one instance, and they do studies on them. And the evolutionist says, boom, here we are. More pronounced forehead. Must be a transition from a primate to a person. Have you ever seen somebody with a more pronounced forehead? Fighters in particular get that. You'll start seeing the sagging over their eyebrows. Anybody here ever been a fighter? You a Cro-Magnon. Three other examples here. The first one, just a regular jawbone. although a whole entire step in our evolutionary process was built out of it. The middle one, they used to create a whole step for us. I believe this was maybe Nebraska man. They did further research on this, and remember they had like a whole 8 person out of this. This is a pig tooth. Bottom right, this was another step in our evolutionary process, but wait, when they study it more, they find it's actually an orangutan jaw. What we see in the fossil record is this. We see top to bottom order. We see huge differences, and then we see minor differences. Evolution would say that there are minor differences that become huge over time. That's top to bottom order. Evolution requires bottom to top order. The Bible requires top to bottom order. And guess what we find? Top to bottom order. God created according to kinds. In Hebrew, that's mean. He creates a kind. So let me give you some examples. Bears, a polar bear, and a grizzly bear. Can you tell it's part of the same family? Because they're both bears, right? Canids are dogs. So if I got a Chihuahua or a weenie dog, and I put it next to a German Shepherd or a Great Dane, they're both dogs, right? Felids, cats. So even if I put a tiger next to a little tuxedo cat, they're both cats. You can tell they're both cats. And equids, horses. And so if you were to take maybe a pygmy horse next to like the Budweiser horse and compare them, they're both horses. The Bible tells us that we start with several basic and very different kinds that diversify over time. As Bible believers, we believe in diversification. God built in diversification. If you don't believe that, look at the audience tonight. People are different. Some people are shorter, Kate. Some people are taller, Chris. Some people have lighter complexions. Some people have darker complexions. Some people have a lot of hair. Some people have hair in different places. So we do have diversification that happens over time. We don't have apes turning into people. We don't have reptiles turning into birds. We don't have birds turning into mammals, and mammals turning into us. We don't see that. And that's science. So here's a chart, pretty small. Cats. Different genuses of cats. There's a lot of different types of cats, but whether you're considering a caracal, or whether you're considering a lynx, or a tiger, or a lion, you can tell they're all cats. Give them a ball, and they'll play with it. Try to get them to love on you, and they'll ignore you. Or eat you. What we see in the fossil record is explosive origins. So we see a lot of really great design from the beginning. The principal types seem to appear rapidly and fully equipped with the signature features of the respective new level of biological organization. No intermediate grades or intermediate forms between different types are detectable. The animal forms that arose in the Cambrian, so the Cambrian's like that bottom layer that we get to in our fossil record before we get to granite. Not only did so without any clear material antecedent, they came on the scene complete with digital code, dynamically expressed integrated circuitry, and multi-layered, hierarchically organized information storage and processing systems. So let me give you an example of this. The Burgess Shale in British Columbia, Canada. These are some of the things that they found there. Everybody loves the trilobite. Trilobite. Top right, trilobites. You find this all over. You see advanced creative systems. You see proboscises. You see intestines. You see antennae. You see all these different features that are highly advanced from the very bottom all the way up. You see advanced systems. That's because God is the builder of everything. And when God makes something, it ain't junk. What we see in the fossil record is discontinuity and stasis. And what that means is when you go deep into the ground and you find a fossil of a spider, it looks the same as a spider today. You see discontinuity and stasis. Animals exist with a form, then they go extinct, or they're still alive. There's no transitions. Richard Dawkins, you may have heard of him, atheist, big atheist, mocks creationists in the Bible. It is as though the fossils were just planted there, without any evolutionary history. Needless to say, this appearance of sudden planting has delighted creationists. Yep. Both schools of thought in evolution despise so-called scientific creationists equally, and both agree that the major gaps are real, that they are true imperfections in the fossil record. Now listen to this. The only alternative explanation of the sudden appearance of so many complex animal types in the Cambrian era is divine creation, and we both reject this alternative. So, in other words, Richard Dawkins is saying, it looks designed, but that's just because we don't have enough information. It looks designed, and that implies a designer, but I don't want there to be a designer, so I'm going to ignore that. There are obviously variations. There are variations between people, there's variations between all sorts of different animals, there's variations between all sorts of different things. Darwin's classic example to uphold his theory were finches in the Galapagos Islands. But here's the thing about the finches that he found. Did they have different beak sizes? Yeah. Over time, they did develop that feature. But because of this, did they change into something different? No, not really. They're still finches. They were able to diversify, but they didn't change into mammals. Peppered moths are another example of this. Based on pollution, they would actually change colors in response to pollution over England or London in particular. And if you are familiar with the Smelser family, the Smelser family, this is one of the Smelser sons standing next to his mother. One generation difference. Now, I will share this. Scott, the dad, is also tall, but just goes to show the mom and the son, there can be diversity. There can be difference, and that's okay. It's good. God did not create a little template, a little gingerbread cookie man, and then punch us out. Okay? We're different, and that's okay. The fossil record attests to Noah's flood. Real quick, polystrate fossils. These are fossils that go across different layers. So remember these layers are like millions of years, supposedly? You have vertical trees that cross over billions of years. Big problem. You have various different sediment layers that have laid down quickly. You've got rapid erosion boundaries, which sounds a lot like Noah's flood, right? The picture on the bottom right, that's the great unconformity. If you saw his Genesis history, they talked a little bit about that. That's just a quick, rapid erosion boundary that is created by water. You can also see that it is at an angle. When water recedes, it recedes at an angle. So this erosion boundary is caused by water. You can see waving patterns on different strata in different places. So here's an example. The Grand Canyon. You can see rapid erosion boundaries, but you can also see waves in them, don't you? They're not 180-degree planes. You'll see planes that dip and recede, just like water. A couple things here. In Genesis 7 and verse 11, it tells us that the fountains of the great deep burst open in the flood. That's a lot of tectonic activity. That's a lot of movement. Things get shifted around. So when we look at the fossil record, it attests to Noah's flood. We have shallow water invertebrates at the bottom, which makes sense because the land animals, what are they going to do when water comes? They're going to go to higher places. We have amphibians, who would be the next affected by the water. then reptiles, next affected by the water, then mammals, then birds, because the birds would fly higher and higher and higher to evade the water. That aligns with what we see in Genesis 6 through 8. And we also, this is one of my favorite ones, is when you have animals that are separated in the rock layers by their footprints. And so they're separated by millions of years by their footprints. Or they're chasing after an animal and they almost got it in their mouth and then they're stuck. It's fantastic. I love those examples. And then you have long transport of animals and sediments. So just a quick example of that. Seashells on top of mountains. How'd they get there? Somebody carried them in a rock in their pocket and threw them out? No. You have seashells moving up onto Mount Everest. They've actually found seashells on Mount Everest. How'd they get there? Not by a local flood, by a global flood. You may have seen this earlier, we just skipped past it quickly. But think about this as we reflect on what we discussed tonight. Dinosaurs and people existed at the same time. Science has shown that. Not the science that everybody wants to accept, but science nonetheless, good science shows this. It all fits. Dinosaurs and fossils and all of it. Dismissing the existence of dinosaurs or trilobites or whatever, or saying that they are some elaborate hoax that Satan created to get us to question our faith, that's folly. And it takes away the grandeur of what God has done. How great thou art, one of the verses, as I recall, mentions dragons. Do we mean it? We need to equip ourselves. We need to study the Word of God. We need to use our God-given intellects to think and to use our observational skills to reflect on how great our God is and how great His creation is. We don't need to corrupt or twist the Bible to try and accommodate secular science. Science, when done appropriately, agrees with the Bible. And we should have no fear of it. When we belittle or dismiss or avoid discussions like this, it's kind of like the little kid who puts their fingers in their ears and doesn't want to listen to somebody else. It only legitimizes stereotypes that people have against Christians when we do that. So think. And as we strive to understand our Creator more through studies like these, we should be infinitely more impressed by His willingness to be stripped of His power and to be born into the world in Jesus. The greatest display of His power and His creativity are not in His harnessing of Leviathan, are not in His harnessing of Behemoth, are not in the great diversity that we see across species. The greatest display of His power and His creativity are seen in the life, death, burial, and resurrection of Jesus. He is the one who made the dinosaurs, and He willingly died to save you from your sins. Now, I got problems, and you got problems, and we live in a broken world. We all have sinned. We got to do something about that. And thankfully, the grace of our Lord is enough to do something about that. We can be forgiven of our sins. He's powerful enough to control sauropods and T-Rexes and everything else. He's powerful and big enough to forgive you of your sins. Think not just about how amazing God is, but about how wretched we are without our God. We've been made in His image, we have tarnished that image. And God can rebuild us, because that's what kind of God we have. So we're going to sing a song, and this is your opportunity to make things right, to make sure that you are ready for the great day that is coming. And as you note in the progression of these verses, you will see something. It's a great day in verse 1. It's a bright day in verse 2. But in verse 3, it's a sad day. It's a sad day when the sinner will hear their doom. Depart, I know ye not. Are you a verse 1 sort of a person and a verse 2 sort of a person? Or are you a verse 3 sort of a person? Will you be saved or will you be lost? Think about that. And make things right if you need to. As together we stand and sing.